Hi, everyone. So now that we've had a discussion about evolution, how it takes place, different things that can affect adaptation and evolution, we are going to be talking about bacteria and viruses as well as your immune system. And let's think about it this way. So, bacteria and viruses are most likely the first type of organism that ever existed on this planet, the first type of living thing. So, if we can better understand bacteria and viruses, we can better understand us as organisms as well as evolution. Now, of course, with what's going on in the world, we will be talking about COVID-19 along the way. But yeah, let's get into it. So, let's talk about the differences between bacteria and viruses because they are very, very different. Now, both of them can be considered pathogens or virulent. So, that's this word down here. And that's basically a bacteria or a virus that makes you sick. So if you've ever heard like of a pathogenic strain or a non-pathogenic strain, the pathogenic strain of a virus or bacteria is the type that can get you sick. Virulent is used in the same way. So again, let's talk about the difference between bacteria and viruses because the way that they can make you sick is a very different process in the way that our immune system handles it and the way that modern medicine handles it, again, has to be very different because they are very different types of things. So we already should know that bacteria are prokaryotes. So they have a very specific cell structure. They belong to the kingdom of Archaeobacteria and Eubacteria. So if we're looking at a phylogenetic tree, they're going to fall under one of those two categories. Now, with them being a prokaryote, they are a living thing, but their cells do not have cell organelles, and they are also believed to be the first life forms on this planet, like I mentioned earlier. And then, like I said, they can be pathogenic or non-pathogenic. So we have bacteria lining our entire GI tract, our entire digestive system. So from mouth to anus, we are covered in bacteria and different types of bacteria. And so those bacteria actually help us digest our food. And in some cases, they can help us fight off viruses, which I will get to in a second. On the other hand, of course, there are different types of bacteria that can make us really, really sick. So some types of bacterial infection could cause strep throat. It could cause, I'm sorry, not strep throat, but it could cause, what do we have? Like food poisoning or some types of pneumonia. There are different things that bad bacteria or virulent bacteria can do. Tuberculosis is one too. So viruses, on the other hand, while they are pathogenic to us, while they are virulent to us, they are not actually considered living things. They are considered abiotic. And this is because viruses cannot interact with their environment. They do not adapt or change really based off of their environment. Um, and so they can affect both prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So there are viruses that will infect bacteria cells, just like there are viruses that will infect human cells. Now, with viruses, because they are not actually living, again, they can contain either some DNA or some RNA, which is located inside of a protein capsule. So we're seeing right now with the COVID vaccine that they're using RNA as part of the vaccine to give us some immunity to this. And again, we'll get into exactly how that works in more detail. But basically, the way that a virus works is it injects its genetic information into the cell that it's going to infect, and it hijacks the cell's machinery to make more viruses until that cell can't possibly hold any more viruses. So, sort of like blowing up a balloon with too much air, eventually it's going to pop, release all of those new viruses into the organism or into the environment where those viruses can then go and infect other cells. So like I said, we will be going into more detail of both. Just keep in mind, one of the main differences, bacteria are considered living, viruses are considered non-living. And so down here, these are all pictures of different types of bacteria shapes, and these are all pictures of different types of virus shapes. All right, so yeah, let's talk about viruses. Like I said, it is a type of pathogen. So viruses can make us sick. And like I said, they are abiotic, they are non-living. So this means they cannot reproduce on their own. That's why they hijack our cells' machinery to make more viruses. They cannot react to their environment. So if it gets hot, if it gets cold, if it gets like too sugary, too salty, too watery, it can't react. And because of that, it's considered neither a prokaryote or a eukaryote, and they are also smaller than bacteria cells. So I think earlier this year, actually, we actually talked about the Ebola virus a little bit. That's another example of a good virus to talk about. I'm sure you've heard of HIV and AIDS. That's another type of virus. The influenza virus is the common flu, which, we're dealing with a different one right now. This is the rabies virus. So if like an animal bites you and they have rabies, is that papilloma? No, but herpes virus looks a little bit like this. If you've heard of like hepatitis B, it's going to look like this. We do a lot of genetic engineering using a bacteriophage, which looks like this as well. So as you can see, many different types of shapes of viruses out there. They all work in a similar way. So the basic structure of a virus, and it can be slightly different depending on the type, just like what we saw in this picture right here. But the general structure of the virus is it's going to have some sort of DNA or RNA code inside of it. It's going to have some sort of genetic information. That's what you're seeing right here in this diagram. And that genetic information is going to code for the proteins that the virus needs in order to make more viruses. So the whole point of a virus is just to make more viruses. It's not like trying to make you sick. It just makes you sick in the process of trying to make more viruses. Around that genetic information, you are going to have what is called a capsid. And so this is a protein structure just around the genetic information to store the genetic information for that virus. And then on the very outside, so right in here, that's where the coat or the glycoproteins are going to go. And basically these proteins are there to interact with other cells. So if you look at a human cell, on the outside of a human cell, it's going to have certain proteins on that cell membrane going around the outside of the human cell. The body interacts by sending different molecules around the body. And if those molecules can bind to those proteins or interact with those proteins, that's how messages are sent. So the virus will replicate those types of molecules and those types of proteins so that they can interact with our cells, and our body doesn't recognize it until it's too late. So basically, this is the key to getting inside of our cells. Now, in terms of viral reproduction and how the virus makes you feel, like if you're feeling sick or feeling healthy, there are two, I'm going to call them like life cycles of the virus. Again, they're not really alive, so it's not really a life cycle. Maybe we can call it like the reproductive cycle of the virus. There's two different versions. So you can have the lytic cycle or the lysogenic cycle. And we're going to be talking about both of those. So at the end of this, when we are looking at both the lytic cycle and the lysogenic cycle, what I do want to point out is that the virus can move between both of these different types of cycles. And this is a really good diagram to come back to remind you about the differences and how it works. All right, so for the lytic cycle, basically this is when viruses are going to pop out of your cells. It's going to kill all of your cells, essentially. So the first step in the lytic cycle is the virus needs to attach to one of your cells, and it uses these glycoproteins. So like I said, these proteins are there so that the host cell recognizes the viral protein coat as belonging to the body, even though it doesn't. It tricks our cells. And so once that virus right here can bind to the host cell, What's going to happen next is called penetration. So the virus will inject its DNA or RNA into the host cell. So you're going to see here, here's our little genetic information. And as you can see, it's coming out of our protein capsule and moving into the actual host cell right here. So step number 3 is biosynthesis. So remember, synthesis means to make. So we're making some biological type of stuff. But basically the virus uses the cell's machinery, so the different cell organelles inside, to make more viral parts and for that DNA RNA replication process. So that's what you're seeing right here. We're making the DNA and RNA, we're making the capsid, we're making the glycoproteins. And so that's step 3. So that's step 4, we can have assembly, which basically means we're putting all of our parts together. So we're putting the RNA in or DNA into the capsid, and then we are making that coat around the capsid with the glycoproteins. We're basically packaging everything up. So like I said, at some point, the cell just physically can't hold any more viruses inside of it. So very much like a balloon, when you blow it up too much, it's going to pop open. And that's when we get to step number 5, which is release. So when the cell does burst open or pops open, we call that lyse or lysing. So the cell will lyse, it lyses open. And that's how it releases new viruses to go and infect more cells. So if this is happening inside of your body, the virus is most likely going to go infect more of your cells. If this is happening like towards the outside of your body, so like in your nose or in your mouth and you're sneezing or coughing, this is how you would spread the virus to somebody else. So this is more of like an infectious stage type of virus for the lytic cycle. This is when you will actually feel sick and have symptoms of contracting that virus because it's killing your cells. So actually that's another thing to mention too. Like if you ever are getting like a sore throat or something when you are sick with a virus, it's because the cells in your throat are dying and exposing raw tissue. And so that's actually why your throat feels sore. All right, so let's talk about the lysogenic cycle. This is more of like the stealthy ninja cycle for viruses. So again, the virus still has to infect the actual cell. So step number 1, the virus releases DNA into the cell or RNA. That's what you're seeing here. So again, we have our bacteriophage and it's releasing its genetic information into the cell. Now this is showing you a virus that's infecting a bacteria cell, but HIV actually works in the same way. So once inside of the cell, the viral genetic information, the viral DNA, will actually integrate itself into the host DNA. So what you're seeing here, and I know it's a little bit small, this like purple region is the host DNA, and this pink region is the viral DNA. So the viral DNA is literally becoming a part of the host DNA. So it's just like sitting inside of the DNA. So if this happened in like a human cell, for example, the viral DNA, and this does happen. This is partially how like HIV works. I think COVID has the potential to do this a little bit. This is also, again, why you might see like an incubation period where you might be infected with a virus, but you don't express the symptoms of it for 2 weeks or whatever it is. Or what's another one like this? Like herpes, the herpes virus, HPV. So there's viruses that work the same way for humans. So the viral DNA has combined with the host DNA, and they basically like look the same to the cell. There's no difference between the two. So at this point, the cell will just like continue doing its normal thing. The virus isn't hijacking the cell quite yet. And basically it's just going to sit in the host cell DNA and let the host cell replicate itself, go through mitosis, go through cell division. And in that process, the viral DNA is also replicated so that when the cell does divide, each new cell gets a full copy of DNA, including the viral DNA. So if we come back to this picture right here, like I said, for the lytic cycle, this is when we're actually creating more viruses to go spread them. For the lysogenic cycle, like I said, it's stealth. It hides in there, it becomes part of your cell and part of the DNA, and it will just keep getting replicated every single time your body needs to make a new cell. And so in that way, it infects many, many, many cells. Now, at some point with this type of virus that's in the lysogenic cycle, there's going to be something that triggers it to actually go into the lytic cycle. So the lysogenic cycle, we can like maintain that for a little while, but at some point, and this is what you see with like HPV viruses, there's like different outbreaks. So people that get cold sores, or if you have other types of like a herpes virus, sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. And basically when you don't, it's in the lysogenic cycle. When you do see it, it's in the lytic cycle. So at some point, there's that environmental trigger that's like, hey, it's time to go and enter the lytic cycle. So the viral DNA ends up popping out of the host cell DNA. That's what you're seeing here. And then we can enter into the lytic cycle where we actually make more viruses to go infect more cells. All right, so I'm going to pause here. Please make sure you are checking in with your vocab notebook. Make sure you are doing all the different vocab words. And when we come back, we are going to be talking more specifically about COVID-19.